Warmest greetings from Leader Associates, my dear audience. Wherever you are, I hope you are well. My name is Molly Huang, Head of Content of Leader Associates, and your host of today's webinar. Welcome to the Impact ASEAN Wind Day, Unleashing Wind in ASEAN. This is also the day 3 and the final day of the APAC Wind Energy Week 2023. ASEAN is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, with its GDP expected to grow at a steady annual rate of between 4 to 5% over the next 10 years, and a corresponding increase in energy demand by 3% per annum over to 2030. Electricity from wind embodies huge potential under the region's pursuit of energy availability and affordability. Nevertheless, the pathway to unlocking the market's full potential has never been easy and is influenced by various factors. How to assess the scale of opportunity of the ASEAN wind market as we see today, and what to expect in the year of 2023. Bearing these questions in mind, today we are more than honored to ask advice from the industry's top minds, inclusive of MacKenzie, Puno and Puno law offices, EBMP ECC3, Triconti ECC Renewables, the world's wind giant Equinor, Total Energies, Coral Generation, and last but not least, the ASEAN star player, the Blue Circle. In the meantime, I would like to encourage our audience to raise with your questions in the Q&A box, as today we have a really amazing speaker lineup. Today's webinar is also the prelude conference of the ASEAN Wind Energy 2023 to be held in Ho Chi Minh City on October the 30th to 31st. With over 600 APAC wind C-suits and more than 5,000 wind industry visitors, the ASEAN Wind Energy 2023 is Southeast Asia's largest wind energy conference and wind tech exhibition.
Thank you, Molly. Okay, let me share my screen here. Great. Hi, so thank you, Molly, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Robert Liew. I'm from the Asia Pacific Power and Renewables team here at Wood Mackenzie. So we are a global energy research consultancy. So we have over 700 specialists, covering the entire value chain spectrum of the global energy landscape, from raw materials to power markets and also end users. So I'd like to thank everyone attending this digital conference today as we go through the outlook for wind power in Southeast Asia. So for today's presentation, I want to go through 3 key points. So first, I want to take a broad look at the role of wind power in Asia Pacific, and then more specifically at Southeast Asia. The second, I want to talk about the cost challenges we are seeing in this current environment, and also how it affects the wind power sector. And finally, we can look at the outlook for wind power in Southeast Asia in different markets, and also some of our cost projections until 2030 compared to other technologies. So let's start off first by looking at what is happening to renewable energy now, and also a snapshot of where we expect it to be in 2030 at the Asia Pacific level. So first, we need to distinguish between power capacity and power generation. So power capacity is important to the supply chain because that translates to how many new wind turbines or how many new solar panels are needed. And also that relates to how much financing is required to build out these new power plants. So this is very different from power generation, which is how much electricity you can generate from the power plant. So this is more relevant to the demand side with utilities who need to ensure that power generation is stable and also remain affordable. So on the left-hand side, we can see that the annual increase in power capacity for wind and solar PV in Asia-Pac. So even in an inflationary environment, we still see new wind and solar capacity continuing to rise. So we see new solar build is already more than double that of wind power in Asia-Pacific. But that also means that its rate of growth will likely be a bit slower due to its very large installed base. Whereas wind power, we are still seeing double digits growth every year. And then there's also the potential boost of, emerging offshore wind sector. So at least by 2030, we should be seeing, over 100 gigawatts of new wind power capacity being added every year in Asia Pacific. Of course, most of that will be from China, and that's around half of the global wind market. On the right-hand side, we can see the generation output of these new added capacity. So as we know, wind power has a higher utilization capacity factor compared to solar PV. So it's not surprising that we can generate more power from wind plants despite there being, more solar power capacity. At least for now, Asia Pacific is still reliant on conventional fossil fuels. So that's not to say there's going to be no change. Every year, as we ramp up new renewable capacity, we expect to see a 1% gain in generation in the energy mix, which is gradually taking away, market share from conventional power. But, let's have a deeper look now at Southeast Asia. So now if we focus on Southeast Asia, the picture is a bit different. So Southeast Asia is even more reliant on conventional power than other regions. So renewables as a share of power generation is still very low. So the combination of wind and solar is just around, 5% of all power generation. And actually most of it, at least for now, is from solar power. Wind power generation and penetration is still quite low. Of course, there are reasons for this. Southeast Asia, we are closer to the equator. The wind speeds tend to be relatively slower. So there are pockets of, high wind speeds, especially in coastal regions, like in southern Vietnam and in the Philippines and in more mountainous terrains. But the world-class wind resources are not widely distributed evenly throughout at least Southeast Asia, this region. But on the upside, we see technology improvements. So we have low wind speed turbines that have longer rotors, they can capture more wind. And so that's actually have opened up and given access to more sites to build wind power plants. So, in the long run, we do expect Southeast Asia will take a longer time in its energy transition. So you can see on the right-hand side, in the very long run, by 2050, the power generation mix in Southeast Asia will eventually reach around 50%. Yeah, but that is still, about 30 years away. So it's quite some time. So we do not expect Southeast Asia to use nuclear power as well. So we can see a lot of this growth in renewables will really rely on wind and solar power. And that's to be supported by, battery storage, biomass, and also geothermal. And the good thing is, like, at the moment with such low penetration, there's still a lot of room, of potential for wind power to expand in the region. So next, I want to talk about some of the key challenges that face the wind power sector. So right now we are in an inflationary environment. Inflation has really hit the sector hard. Wind power is a bit different. It's not like the solar power sector where there has been a huge ramp up in surplus supply chain capacity, and that's really forced prices back down. On the left-hand side, you can see that the solar sector is benefiting from a very huge increase in production capacity, especially for silicon. This excess capacity, resulted in silicon prices dropping by more than 40% from last November. And that's actually resulted in solar panel prices dropping by more than 25%. However, we don't think that's a permanent drop in prices. Following the New Year holiday, demand has surged again, and prices have actually rebounded by 30%. So manufacturers, have returned to high operation rates, and that quickly used up all the excess inventory. So now we have a bit tighter supply. For wind power, so let's use blades as a representative sample for the sector since it is unique to wind power. So we saw average prices hit a bottom in July 2020, but that has since increased by a quarter, 25% over the last 2 years. And that's really due to a surge in raw material costs and higher fuel costs, translating into higher transportation and production costs. So we think these higher costs will remain elevated until 2024. And what's more, we're seeing labor and energy costs have risen, and these higher costs will remain quite sticky. So we're also seeing interest rates in Southeast Asia still increasing. We see central banks trying to keep inflation down. So there's a possibility that, inflation could possibly peak this year and start to retreat. But at least in our base case scenario, the flow-on effects to low prices will take some time to come into effect. Now, if we want to look at the value chain for wind power, so we can see that the impact of inflation is not really evenly distributed. So the most challenging part is really in the upstream areas where you're facing the squeeze. So we have supply chain companies, they are the most exposed to annual installation fluctuations, which are highly dependent on cost pressures, policy, power price changes. If you are a component vendor, now it's a bit tough to pass on the commodity price increase to the turbine suppliers since you've already signed multi-year large volume price supply contracts. And if you are a turbine supplier, you are facing a competitive pricing environment. And also there's additional risk, from the time lag between the order placement and also the turbine delivery. So this lag leaves you vulnerable to commodity price fluctuations, logistic costs, and execution risk. But on the other hand, downstream companies are in a better position. So they are protected by the security of having a very large installed base. So this provides a lifeline, for turbine suppliers because it offers a stable revenue and a profit stream with the advantage of spare part supply and also technical support. Now, of course, they are not immune to price rises. We still see profit pressures, especially in maintenance labor services in a very tight labor market. And of course, if you look at the entire value chain, the best margins is obviously as an asset owner because you benefit from increasing wholesale power prices and also of improving operational expenses efficiencies. So that's why we're starting to see this trend of more companies trying to migrate downstream to build up a development arm and also diversify beyond just the wind supply chain. So this is especially the case for large conglomerates. Now, in the last section, let's take a look at the cost and installation outlook for wind power in Southeast Asia over the next decade. So here is our estimate of the outlook until 2031. So Vietnam is by far the largest market and is also a major outlier, especially with 2021, we saw that wind power tariffs expired and projects rushed to be completed. So after that peak, we expect the remaining capacity there to be built that did not qualify for the tariff to gradually come online until there's a new replacement policy, a mechanism that's finalized by the government. Now, right now, the current situation is still unresolved. There is still some political instability, and that's delaying the latest national power plan, so PDP8. So the latest update is that we see announcements of ceiling prices that are at least 20% lower than the previous tariffs. And then the interesting thing is that even though we are showing some leftover capacity in 2022, officially the government still has not recognized any new added capacity, and that's adding more policy uncertainty in the market. But the good thing is we see other Southeast Asian markets are starting to pick up again. So that includes the Philippines and also in Thailand. In Thailand there's been new green energy auctions in the case of the Philippines, and Thailand has allocated new feed-in tariff quotas for a range of renewable energy technologies, including wind power. And we could also start to see, some of the largest onshore wind power plants in Southeast Asia coming online. That's being built in Laos, and that will export power to a power-hungry Vietnam, and that should start to come online starting from next year. So that will be a real feat, considering this is the first utility-scale power plant in the country. Now, Indonesia could also be seeing some development activity. The third utility-scale wind power plant is starting to come online next year. And there's some possibility that we could see, Cambodia's first wind power plant come online in the next few years. But that's, once the PPA negotiations are resolved with the government, which still remains a challenge. So in all, even with, much lower installations compared to other regions, the wind outlook for Southeast Asia, could see, total wind power capacity almost triple by 2030. So we're talking about an installed base that would reach upwards of 17 gigawatts. So a lot of that is riding on how successful Vietnam can solve its policy challenges. But overall, this is a region that will see one of the fastest growth rates for wind power development. So you see the chart here, we expect to see average compound annual growth rate of about 12%. as wind power starts to expand from a very low installed base. And finally, let's have a look at the average cost projection of wind power in Southeast Asia until 2030, and then try to compare that with other technologies. So at least for now, coal power is still the most, at least, competitive source of all technologies. That averages around $80 per megawatt hour on average for the region. Currently, the average cost of onshore wind is still about 50% higher compared to coal costs, which is usually the on-grid price in Southeast Asia. So what we see is that large-scale solar utility projects would likely be the first to start competing with coal power by as early as 2025. And that's because, it's due to a greater availability and a larger installed base in Southeast Asia compared to wind power. Wind costs will remain a bit elevated this year, but we could start to see prices coming down in the near future. And we will see onshore wind, start to become competitive with coal by the end of this decade. On the right, you can see the cost range between all the different markets in Southeast Asia. The range, of course, depends on how good the wind resources are to enable high performance, and the costs associated with exporting that power, in often remote areas with limited infrastructure. And in the chart of the LCOE, I've also added some of the emerging technology that we could see in Southeast Asia. So for now, the cost of these technologies remain much higher, as there is no track record in the region yet for hybrid onshore wind that combines with battery storage. We expect the high cost of battery storage will add significant cost premium to standalone onshore wind. Offshore wind is also another potential future segment for wind power. There are some pipeline projects that are being planned, for example, in the Philippines and Vietnam, but nothing firm has been built so far. So we actually consider the projects that qualified for the offshore wind tariff in Vietnam to be more nearshore or intertidal, rather than the mainstream offshore projects similar to what you see in markets like Taiwan and also Europe. And then finally, we see that both the hybrid projects and offshore wind are promising technologies. That can enable more stable and high utilization compared to just onshore wind power. If companies can find a way to rapidly bring down that cost and then make them more attractive to government planners, then we could potentially see a more upside in the wind outlook for Southeast Asia. So to summarize for today's presentation, wind power will play a key role in Asia Pacific's future energy mix, but it will take a longer time to be realized in Southeast Asia. Second, the cost challenges are likely to persist in the short term, but that can be mitigated depending on your position in the value chain. And then third, since Southeast Asia is growing from a much lower base, that rate of wind power development will make it one of the fastest growing wind regions in the world. And we think, at least onshore wind will gradually become the most cost competitive with other technologies, especially by 2030. And with that, I will end my presentation. And yeah, thank you all for listening. I'm happy to take any questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Robert, for your kind sharing. And this is a very solid presentation. We have collected some questions from the audience beforehand, and also we have some questions on site. So if I may, I would like to raise these questions on the audience behalf.
Sure.
Yes, the first question, as you mentioned, that the cumulative wind power in ASEAN will increase triple from 6 gigawatt as of now to 70 gigawatt by 2030, underlying 11 gigawatt of new addition. It's not small. What do you think are the main drivers and the obstacles behind?
Yeah, so for the drivers, it's quite clear that, as wind becomes more competitive, it's gaining more attention from government planners. And as we've seen from the energy crisis right now, if you have renewable energy, there's no fuel cost, that power is all yours. No one can take it away from you. So I think there's a sense of concern that, we should at least try to diversify our energy mix. And wind power being one of the most mature, more mainstream technologies with prices coming down, yeah, that will drive a lot of this capacity build out for renewables. And if you want to compare in terms of the size of utility scale plants, wind power plants tend to be much larger than solar PV. And also if you compare offshore wind to solar PV, that's on another scale altogether. So if we're talking about offshore wind, we're talking about projects that are almost at the same capacity scale as, coal power plants or gas power plant. So there's a large potential there for wind power to come and offset some of that legacy fossil fuel plants. Of course, the obstacles are known to everybody. It's a renewable technology. We have no fuel prices, but then the issue, of course, is how do you manage this intermittency? How do you manage, all these different sources of new technology coming onto the grid? So we have situations like in Vietnam where they introduced a very attractive policy. Everybody rushed in, but there was no follow-up. There was no long-term plan to fix this. So what we're seeing now is that we're seeing a lot of projects that are being built that are not grid connected, that are, just being stalled, basically, and just waiting for the next investment scheme. So you have to be very careful in planning out markets, understanding the policies, whether the government is really committed to expanding renewables or not.
Yes, and the second question is really about onshore versus offshore. As you mentioned, there will be 11 gigawatt new additions. How would you see the market share between onshore and offshore wind? Let's also put nearshore projects into the offshore category.
Yeah, so yeah, it is a bit tricky. At least nearshore offers an opportunity for markets that don't want to spend that much money building, real offshore power plants that require offshore turbines and offshore vessels to build them out. So at least I think in the short term to 2030, most of it, more than 80%, will continue to be onshore wind for sure. Offshore wind really is, at the moment, at least one of the highest cost technologies of all the renewables. So what we typically see is that, if you want to build the real offshore power plant, you'll see that's why they're being explored in East Asian markets, like richer markets like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, because they got scale and all the manufacturing base is based there. They can also expand on that. But for Southeast Asia to do offshore wind, I think it's still a bit of a tougher sell. But you can sell that because, like I said, offshore wind is on a much larger scale compared to onshore wind. It operates at a much higher capacity factor. Typically, if you find a good site, you can operate it, on average 40% plus. That's what we're seeing in Taiwan right now for offshore. But again, the downside is that if something goes wrong with the offshore plant, the cost to fix it is significantly higher compared to onshore wind. So you need to have that expertise. You need to have the technical capabilities. You know how to maintain the operational efficiencies of offshore winds before you want to really get involved in it. So at least in the short term, we do see that onshore wind is still be the core focus, but maybe 2030 plus onwards, we'll start to see, offshore wind start to pick up.
Yes, and policy is one of the main triggers for a wind market. In terms of the ASEAN countries, which market do you think provides the most robust social and political framework for wind investment? You have touched Vietnam, the Philippines, Thailand, Laos, etc. Please name the top 3 markets in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, the function obviously for renewables is you need to build it where the resources are. So it's like the places where the best wind resources are, at least in Southeast Asia, is Vietnam and the Philippines. Thailand, to some extent, is a low wind speed sites, but there are pockets of it in the mountainous areas. You can build them out. I mean, right now, I don't see a lot of the Southeast Asian markets being particularly, demanding of more offshore or more onshore wind power. They know that they don't have that many sites for wind power. They'd rather focus on distributed solar PV, biomass, and some of the maybe potential geothermal. But in terms of just the potential of the Southeast Asian markets, it will still be the usual suspects. So we're talking about Vietnam, Philippines, and also and Laos is the exception there. That's a special case where they found a spot. The land costs are quite low. There's a lot of demand in Vietnam where you can export that power from. So, but that's really a one-off because the power demand in Laos is quite low. So I think at least going forward, the potential future markets we'll be looking at, would be Indonesia, Cambodia, those kind of emerging markets. But the core markets will still be, Vietnam and the Philippines, just because based on the function of, where are the wind resources.
Thank you, Robert. And one last question from the audience, from Ms. Ruth Chen, I believe. With regards to wind turbine supply profitability, does your chart include mainland Chinese turbine suppliers? I think that's the chart.
Yeah,
right?
So that's a bit different. So China is the odd one out because in those markets, the prices have actually come down. So yeah, so even for offshore wind, we've done cost analysis for all kinds of technologies for onshore and for offshore. For the China market, because the supply chain is based there, the economies of scale are there, the projects are so large, and there's so much competition, and competition is very fierce. And also the government policy targets are, very aggressive. So we've seen at least prices in the at least China market, at least for the wind turbines, are this the only market in the world where the prices have come down. But in terms of the markets outside of China, now we see the prices have risen, and they'll stay at a high level, at least in the short term.
Yes, thank you very much for your informative sharing and your generous answer to the questions. Although there are still some questions in the Q&A box, I don't have time to go through every of them. So I would appreciate if you can stay a little bit longer to address these questions.
Right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. And now, perhaps we can zoom in a little bit to the country specifics after learning the blueprint. Especially as Robert mentioned, the Philippines and Vietnam are now the top lead in terms of wind in ASEAN. With great honor, now I would like to invite our second presenter on stage, Mr. Layug, Senior Partner of Puno and Puno Law Offices and the President of the Developers of Renewable Energy for Advancement. The floor is yours now, Mr. Layug.
Thank you, Molly. Let me just turn on my slides. Can you see my slides clearly?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you the Philippine experience. And very briefly, allow me to present my slides. Let me show you where we are in the Philippines. When we talk about the current supply and generation capacity situation, here is where we stand. We have about 26 megawatts of installed capacity. And you will note here that we still use a lot of coal. We have a lot of coal plants that have been operating for more than 20 years already. And in terms of renewables, you will see that while we have about 29% installed capacity in the Philippines, unfortunately, in terms of actual generation, this 29% is down to 20%. So Philippines is still heavy on coal. And in terms of renewables, as I mentioned, 29%. And you will see from here that in terms of wind projects onshore, we have 443 megawatts only. So we don't have that lots of megawatts for wind, but we're hoping to add more in the system. Now, this shows us the capacity profile of power plants in the Philippines. Again, as I mentioned, you will note from here that more than 6,000 megawatts are coal plants that had been operating for 20 years. So what we have experienced lately in the Philippines for the last 4 years is that the coal plants have been breaking down. That's why during summer months, where it's very warm and there's a lot of demand for power, we have experienced a lot of forced outages. In other words, our supply does not meet the demands during the summer months. So we do have a lot of renewable energy resources in the Philippines. We call that Big Show, but because we are more wind-centric today, you will note that the Philippines has a lot of potential. In fact, about 76,600 megawatts. And in terms of service contracts, which is the primary permit granted to RE developers, you will note from here that indeed the government has awarded a lot of renewable energy service contracts. And in terms of wind, they total about 145 projects. So that's about 30,000 megawatts. Of course, it's one thing to say we've awarded contracts. It's another thing to determine whether they will proceed to development. The Philippines had a lofty target of about 35% renewables way back in 2010. And there's a reason for that high target back then. We don't produce a lot of coal, we don't produce a lot of oil, and certainly we don't have a lot of natural gas. In fact, our Malampaya gas field will end by 2024. That's next year already. And until now, we have not found any replacement for Malampaya. So because of that, the government has decided to actually have a very high target for renewables. Now, you can see from the last, for the last 10 years, we have gone the reverse. Once upon a time, you will see on the left-hand side, we reached 34% installed capacity. for renewables. And in 2020, we're down to 29%. And in terms of power generation, from a high of 32% actual generation for renewables, we are down to 20%. And look what happened to coal. We have reversed ourselves. Despite all the rules that we have passed, we have gone the opposite way. And it has hurt us a lot because we import all our coal primarily from Indonesia. And you all know, because we import coal, that means we are vulnerable to the price shocks. And we have seen that for the last 2 years, where coal prices have gone up drastically. So from a self-sufficiency of about 67%, we are now down to 46% because we are using more coal. Now, through the years, for the last 10 years, as I mentioned, we have quite a few renewable energy projects that went online. And in terms of wind, there's about 400 megawatts, amounting to about 52 billion pesos in investment. But we are still lagging in terms of our target. We should have had more. That was the target. Now, luckily, the World Bank last year came up with a study, and I was part of that study where we determined that indeed the Philippines has a lot of potential for floating, for both floating and fixed offshore wind in the Philippines. In fact, in terms of technical potential, it's about 178 gigawatts. And you will see also from the data that our potential obviously far exceed the need for electricity in the Philippines. Now, the World Bank report identified 6 development zones all over the archipelago. And because of that World Bank study, a lot of renewable energy developers, wind developers in particular, had applied for service contracts in the Philippines. In fact, you will note from our records now, the government has awarded a total of 52 offshore wind service contracts, totaling to about 40 gigawatts. So the Philippines is very excited. Of course, all these service contracts are on pre-development stage, and we hope that in the next 7 to 10 years, we finally get to develop the first offshore wind project in the Philippines. That is our goal. Now, in terms of regulatory framework, well, before that, just to confirm, the Philippines indeed is heavy on demand for power. In fact, in the next 20 years, we anticipate that we need 43 gigawatts of power. And as a result of that, of course, we passed several laws, particularly the Renewable Energy Act of 2008. And you will note from here that when the law was passed, we call this a law with a buffet of incentives. Name it, we have it. We both have fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. In terms of fiscal, there's a long list there. We have a 7-year income tax holiday. We have duty-free importation. We have a special real property tax of 1.5%. So there's a long list. No? And after you benefit from the income tax holiday, you only pay 10% corporate income tax when the normal rate is about 25%. All sales from renewables are zero-rated VAT, value-added tax. So we have all these fiscal incentives, and they are not limited to fiscal. Our law, Renewable Energy Act, also provides for non-fiscal incentives. We have the feed-in tariff system, which was implemented all the way until 2019. We have the renewable portfolio standards. We have the net metering. And of course, we have the green energy option. As I mentioned, we did the FIT, the FIT, way back in 2016, ended in 2019. And these are the parameters across 4 different technologies. So there's a total of about 1,400 megawatts currently running in the Philippines of renewable energy projects that were awarded feed-in tariff systems for a period of 20 years. Now, the FIT system, of course, generated a lot of savings for the consumers. Aside from the FIT, we also have the net metering program in the Philippines. We have the RPS. The RPS is a mandate to all utilities that they need to buy renewables. In fact, initially we had a target of 1% of net electricity sales for each utility, and that was recently increased to 2.53%. So you will see from here that if you calculate all the demand of utilities for renewables, there's a lot to build in terms of renewable energy power plants. And the RPS is not limited to on-grid areas. The off-grid areas are also mandated. Now, aside from the RPS, we have the Green Energy Option Program. This is a program where contestable customers, those with at least 100 kilowatt of demand, can source directly from RE power suppliers. So this is another market that the rules provide for in the Philippines. And of course, we have the renewable energy market, where for every megawatt hour that you produce, you will have one renewable energy certificate, which you can trade and use as a form of compliance under the RPS. The last, of course, one of those rules that have implemented last year is the Green Energy Auction Program. And we have, last year was a lot of excitement for the Philippines. We did the first round, and we expect another round in June of this year. And we're hoping that there will be a higher target from the original 2,000 megawatt awarded last year. Now, the Philippines, ever since there's a change in government, has drastically turned around its policy. From a more restrictive type, we have now opened our renewable energy market, and this time to foreign investors. So there's no more limit to 60-40 Filipino ownership. 100% foreigner can develop and put up renewable energy plants in the Philippines. And this just reiterates the first round of auction last year, and we awarded solar, biomass, hydro, and wind projects under a specific green energy price approved by the regulator. Just showing you some of the prices now. As I mentioned, we had the renewable energy program where we set 35% way back in 2010. The government now has increased that to 50% by 2040. So now we are improving our target, and we have become ambitious about it. And part of the improvement in the process of application for the Philippine service contracts is everything now goes online. We have the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop, and this has generated a lot of renewable energy service contracts. Aside from that, we have a new DOE set of rules where all renewable energy plants are now considered preferential dispatch in the spot market. And this has helped a lot, especially for renewable energy plants that do not have any offtake agreements. So in summary, we have so much opportunity in the Philippines with all these rules that we have provided. And one, you can definitely negotiate for a power supply agreement with the DUs under the RPS. Two, you can negotiate for green energy option supply contracts with the contestable customers. Three, you can definitely participate at the Green Energy Auction Program of the government, which is much like a feed-in tariff system. You will be awarded a 20-year contract to receive the winning price that you bidded for. And finally, of course, you have the wholesale electricity spot market. And because you are priority dispatch, you can be assured that your power plant will be dispatched in the spot market. So we have had a lot of players that have entered the market, particularly on wind, because we have opened the market, and you have all these major players entering the Philippine, particularly the Philippine offshore wind market. So with that, I'm open to questions, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Layug, for your kind sharing and introduction of the Philippine renewable energy regulation and policy concern with investment and development. We all know that Philippines is the hero of 2022 with respect to its advancement in the offshore wind sector. You also mentioned several mechanisms and also 52 offshore wind service contracts being granted overnight. How well prepared do you think the Philippines is to get the offshore wind projects up to scale, especially in terms of the legislation readiness? On a scale of, yes, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 represent the highest score. How's your confidence rate right now?
Well, if you just ask for my confidence, it will be 5. No, under the new government, they are very proactive in making sure the projects are developed. That's why when the new government took over in June of last year, you saw all these changes. The market has been open for foreigners. They increased the RPS to 2.52%. And then they also issued the rules on preferential dispatch. So in terms of confidence in the government and the leadership currently of the government, confidence is very high. Now, in terms of readiness, just like any other jurisdiction, Mali, we need more rules, right, to address some gaps. And that is where the government is now trying to address. The president of the Philippines created a task force solely for offshore wind. So you can see the seriousness of this government, because the Philippine president wants to make sure that a new offshore wind project will go online before he steps down in 2028. So we're very bullish and we're very excited with the current set of government officials.
I agree with you on that part. But are there any domestic laws or specific regulations that may restrict companies who are considering the investment?
I don't think so, Mali. The challenge really is primarily on the infrastructure, particularly the transmission line. So anyway, it is a long lead time to develop offshore wind. If it's going to be still in 2028, 2029, we have time to make sure that the transmission line will be ready. So there's enough time for the government to prepare for that. And we have started early as this time. The government is now looking at how to improve the transmission assets to make sure that whatever offshore wind project goes online will be ready and will be received by the transmission infrastructure.
And also, as you mentioned, the Philippines has a fantastic program called Green Energy Auction Program. Do you think offshore wind projects will be a part of this GEOP program, perhaps within this year or in the near future? I think for this year, it will be in June or July.
Certainly not this year, Mali. I think it's too early. In fact, the government is asking us if we submit bids, are you sure you can commit to that price by the time you develop that, which is in 2029, 2030. So not this year, but we're hopeful if we're able to provide government enough inputs, maybe we can do the auction for offshore wind next year at the earliest, and maybe the next year in 2025 as well.
Yes, Ms. Liew, one last question to wrap up your presentation. So how do you see the market for corporate PPAs in the Philippines, especially for wind or offshore wind?
Well, Mali, it's become very robust market. A lot of the corporates are now looking at transitioning to renewables. And in fact, a lot of them, industrial customers, are looking for renewable energy supply, which we don't have now. We don't have extra supply. So we're anticipating that certainly for onshore wind, there will be a market for corporate PPA. Offshore wind, because of the scheme, probably no corporate will buy 100 megawatts. It's too big for them. But certainly for onshore wind, there is a lot of room and opportunity for corporate PPAs.
Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Liew, for your kind sharing. This is very informative. We also harbor the same wish that the Philippines will be a renewable success in ASEAN. And now let's move to our next speaker to navigate the Vietnam market. Please join me to welcome Mr. Ngoc Phuc, legal specialist of EVN PE33. Sorry about my pronunciation. Maybe Dang, you can firstly introduce yourself and then start your presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you for the opportunity. Let me share the slides here. Just a second. All right. Hello, I'm Ngoc Phuc. I'm from EVN PECC3, and we provide consultancy and construction service mainly in the power sector. And we have more than 40 years of experience, and our company has been listed on Hanoi Stock Exchange in 2009. All right. As you may know, 2022 is the tough year, not only for the wind power, but also the renewable energy as a whole. As the feed-in tariff ended and the long anticipated power development plan number 8 is still pending. In my topic, I would talk about the legal framework, the pricing mechanism, and the outlook of the future legal development of the wind power in Vietnam. Regarding the legal framework, I will start with the power development plan. It is a national master plan setting out a scheme of organized large-scale planning and direction for the national power sector for a certain period of time. So it provides planning for such as the distribution of the energy resources, the construction of the national transmission infrastructure, and the national energy security. So I think it is one of the most important legal instruments for wind power in Vietnam, because for wind power to be developed, it must at first be included in a power development plan. And most of the wind power projects in Vietnam are under the PDP number 7. And we are looking forward to the PDP number 8, which will favor the development of renewable energy significantly and provide plentiful room for the wind power in the future. So the PDP was originally scheduled for development. It was originally scheduled for release in 2020 and 2021, but it didn't happen. And if it is approved by the Prime Minister, I think it would open unprecedented opportunity for the wind power in Vietnam. Next is the electricity law, and it is also very important to the wind power because it basically managed the government monopoly in the electricity market and other critical factors. So if we want a comprehensive regulatory reform, we would have to update the electricity law. Next is the decision number 37, following by the decision number 39, which provides a legal basis for the feed-in tariff and other favorable treatments for the wind power. Circular number 2, 2019, for the requirements and procedure for the wind power development, and the PPA contract model. Recently, the PPA contract model is updated by the circular number 1, where terms regarding the feed-in tariff, the EVN's obligation to purchase on electricity, and the 20-year purchase period are officially deleted. And the reason for this is at the Ministry of Industry and Trade explained in one of their reports, is that following the decreasing cost of the wind power and renewable energy globally, they no longer see the reason to make EVN purchase on electricity at the feed-in tariff price for a fixed 20-year period. Offshore wind has another different story. Now we have the law on natural resources and environment of sea and island for the general management of the natural resource and environment of sea and island and the protection of marine life. The decree number 11 for the assignment of sea areas and the survey permits. The problem with the offshore wind is that all of the projects now are stuck at the survey permit process because the Ministry of the Natural Resource and Environment said that they need more detailed procedure and instruction from the government on how for the survey permit approval process. So they request to postpone the process until at least for now. We also have other regulations that partly relevant to the wind power, such as the investment law, the environmental protection law, the construction law when you construct a wind foundation, and the Vietnamese Sea, etc. Next, I would like to give a short introduction to Vietnam's approach in granting survey permits. So in Vietnam, surveys are conducted by offshore wind developers, and they must submit proposal to the competent authority, requesting to carry out comprehensive surveys in certain area. And so the survey permit does not guarantee the right to sea area, and it is granted following a different procedure. This is one of the biggest concern for offshore wind developers, because as they said, their investment in the survey will not guarantee anything, and many solutions has been suggested by experts, such as the offshore wind auction, like the models that have been applied in the United States, Denmark, and the UK. The pricing mechanism is another. The pricing mechanism is another interesting story. I will start with the feed-in tariff back in 2021, and the condition is only wind power projects that achieved COD before 11 November were entitled to the feed-in tariff. But it is also the period of the pandemic and COVID-19, so there were 62 projects that missed that deadline, and they are called transitional projects. During that period, there was no applicable pricing mechanism for transitional project, and it technically means those projects could not sell electricity, and they were inactive during that period. Many solutions were suggested by lawmakers. For example, the Direct Power Purchase Agreement, DPPA, and the renewable energy auctions. But the MOAT finally decided that they would let EVN to negotiate the electricity price and within a selling price. And the selling price is the maximum price EVN can pay. At first, the many investors were not very happy with the selling price. They say it is disappointing because the selling price is lower than the feed-in tariff by at least 21%. And they said they could not maintain a good rate of profit with a selling price. As you can see here, the estimated internal rate of return with the selling price is about 4 to 5% lower than the internal rate of return with a feed-in tariff. So many people hope that the selling price is just a temporary solution by the government to help out those transitional projects, and they believe in another official feed-in tariff in the future. But based on my observation in the international experience, there will be no feed-in tariff, I guess, in Vietnam, because the cost of renewable energy is decreasing globally, and the pandemic followed by the economic crisis, and there are other alternatives for the government subsidy. So the feed-in tariff is ending as the government is staying away from the subsidy scheme, and we have to look for other market solution. Here, but despite all the difficulties and challenges, the good news is Vietnam just signed up the Just Energy Transition Partnership, JETP, where G7 nations and Norway pledged to provide Vietnam with more than $15 billion over the next 3 to 5 years to help the country accomplish its net zero emission target in 2015. So, following the political declaration of Vietnam, the development of renewable energy is one of the key targets, and I think it demonstrates that the Vietnamese government addressed a great interest in the promotion of renewable energy, including the wind power. and it is a great success for the green economy in Vietnam, following a long negotiation. In early 2022, Vietnam was offered only $5 billion US, and Vietnam was very offended by that offer because it is lower than what has been offered to South Africa, despite how similarly complex and costly for Vietnam to totally eliminate the coal power. And on the national scale, the Vietnamese politicians and governments have the consensus on the promotion of renewable energy from the circular economy development, where the renewable energy development is one of the main tasks, to the national master plan, where the government would accelerate the green energy transition and increase the proportion of renewable energy. As you can see here, this is the energy scenario in the RAP Power Development Plan number 8. As you can see here, on 3 energy scenarios demonstrate that by 2050, the proportion of wind energy in Vietnam would be from 25% to 30%. And 2 out of 3 energy scenarios, there would be a significant increase of wind power by 2030 from 10% to 29%. So I think from the political point of view, the wind power in Vietnam has a very promising future. In 2021 and 2020, we also discussed many great ideas that could be one of the important legal framework for wind power, notably the direct power purchase agreement. We even have the wrapped regulation for the DPPA, which allow for a pilot scheme and to implement DPPA on a small scale. We also have the renewable energy auction, offshore wind auction, but we have not had any official proposal or legal framework here in Vietnam, and we are very much expect them to be possible in the near future. And the private involvement in grid infrastructure development. This is important because one of the most difficult one of the biggest obstacle of the wind power or the renewable energy in Vietnam is that the development of the grid infrastructure is not on par with the development of renewable energy. And most of the renewable energy projects of Vietnam are located in the middle part, and where the outdated and limited grid infrastructure cannot support the increasing renewable capacity. So the government decided that they will allow for the involvement of private businesses in developing the grid infrastructure, and I think this update would open a great investment opportunity and increase the potential of the wind power. In recent years, EVN BCC3 have also been involved in many major renewable energy projects. As you can see here, our projects are located in south and in middle of Vietnam. My key points, finally, my key points for this topic is that in the short term, the renewable energy, the picture of the wind power and renewable energy may be not really clear and with a little bit of uncertainty, but in the long term with the JETP, I think that the wind power has a great political support in Vietnam, which can be a good foundation for a comprehensive regulatory reform in the future. But we have to be patient. Thank you very much. I think this is the end of my topic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dan, for your kind address. This is a very great presentation. Vietnam is kind of a sweet bitter market. It's the first ASEAN country to pledge coal phase out by 2040, I think. Also, it's a market with strong economic growth rate and past success in solar. But the progress has been a little bit slow in the past 2 to 3 years, which was a little bit disappointing to especially the foreign investors. I have prepared 4 questions for you. If I may, I would like to also to raise on behalf of the audience.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, the first question is, what do you think is the most critical regulatory hurdle for wind power projects in Vietnam?
I think the most critical legal obstacle for the wind power project in Vietnam is the lack of clear and rigid legal framework. PDPA is still pending the pricing mechanism for any newer projects following the PDPA has not been officially discussed. And regulation relevant to the wind power can be found in many separate regulations. So there are numerous requirements, approval, and permits that the wind power must comply with. So this can be extremely confusing and intimidating to investors.
Yes, and what do you see the future of wind market in Vietnam, perhaps in the next 1 or 2 years?
So to answer the question, we should consider the fact that as the selling price is recently introduced, and we can always know exactly when the PDPA will be approved. So, and the situation in the 1 or 2 years will be around how the transitional projects will be managed to keep themselves financially viable in the upcoming years. So, and I know that some investors even consider selling their projects. But however, if the PDPA is approved within this year, this will create a different story. And I hope that the wind market will be busy again, like what we saw during the period of feed-in tariff. But yet I would also take into account the fact that it will take months and even years for a new regulation in Vietnam to come into effect and exert a full impact on the market.
Yes, there are many discussions around the PDPA, when it will be released, what are the guidelines, what are details. Let's put it in a more extreme way. Assuming the PDPA will be effective tomorrow, do you think it will bring a big boom to the Vietnam wind market, especially you mentioned the onshore wind market and offshore wind market are struck by the recently announced ceiling price?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the PDPA favors the renewable energy significantly, and I think it provides the wind power massive room for future development. And so let's consider the PDPA as the first layer of the legal framework for the wind power. And once approved, the PDPA will be the foundation for all the regulatory layers, and including relevant decision, circulars, and laws by authority of all levels that are intended to implement the master plan there. So that means the onshore wind market will definitely start up again.
Thank you. And one last question to wrap up your presentation. How do you see the impacts of GETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership, toward wind power development landscape in close future?
GETP means a lot for the wind power development in Vietnam because GETP will support Vietnam in achieving its energy transition targets. And it helped Vietnam increase the share of renewable energies to 45%, sorry, 47%. Exactly. So as for the next step, Vietnam will be working with international partners group to develop and put in place the Vietnam JATP resource and mobilization plan. It will set out the process and strategy for implementing and allocating the JATP funding. So therefore, in the near future, the financing of the JATP will be the key support, not only for the transitional projects, but for the new projects, because it provides valuable access to the low interest rate funding and facilitate the development of a clear and streamlined legal framework for the wind power. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott, for your answer and your participation today. This is highly appreciated. And now it comes to our fourth presentation of the day and last keynote before the panel. This speech is presented by Mr. Theo Sunico, Vice President of Triconti ECC Renewables. Previously, in Mr. J. Liew's presentation, we have discussed the regulatory outlook of the Philippine wind market. What about the developer side of the story and how to move the market from megawatt to gigawatt? Please join me to welcome Mr. Theo.
Pleasant good afternoon to everyone. I'm Theo Sunico, co-founder and one of the directors of Triconti Windcraft Group. I'd like to thank Leader Associates for inviting me today to this Impact ASEAN discussion to share our insights about the emerging offshore wind industry in the Philippines, how much has changed since we started in 2020, and what more needs to be done to see the first offshore wind farms operational in the Philippine waters before the end of this decade. So let me just, put up my presentation, or Molly, will you be the one to put it up?
Theo, you can drive the slides yourself.
Okay. Thank you. Can you now see my presentation?
I can see the presentation, but it's not in full screen.
Okay. How about that one?
Nah.
Not yet. There.
It's in editor's mode, right?
So this one, is it in editor's mode or is it now?
Already fine.
Okay. Okay. So sorry for that. Okay. So very quickly, let me just introduce who we are, Triconti Windcraft Group. Triconti is a joint venture between Filipino and Swiss-German renewable energy professionals. With Stream Invest Holdings, we formed a partnership in 2013 to explore opportunities provided by the Renewable Energy Act of 2008 in the Philippines for independent developers to contribute meaningfully to the Philippines' clean energy ambitions. Since then, we have built up a local team of about 30 engineers and professionals to explore and develop wind power projects across the country. With more than 30 years of combined experience among us in both the local and global power industry, we've been able to build a pipeline of, in the Philippines, of an estimated 450 megawatts in onshore and pioneer the development of about 3.5 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity. We clearly believe in the ongoing energy transition in the Philippines and have committed ourselves to do our part in the wind energy sector and to bring this about. So, reasons for optimism. We were asked here to be able to discuss about how to move megawatts to gigawatts, particularly in the offshore wind sector. Over the past decade, the global impact of climate change can no longer be ignored. This is keenly felt in the Philippines, where the country has been consistently identified as one of the most vulnerable to extreme weather events and sea level elevations that characterize global warming. Amidst the backdrop of the global pandemic that we've all recently experienced, and in some continue to experience, that has impacted the global supply chain, Philippine electricity demand is expected to grow threefold by 2030. Aiming to wean itself away from our dependence on imported fuel. Right now, we import about 50% of our required coal the Department of Energy has taken a more aggressive stance to promote renewable energy sources to meet the objectives of energy security independence to power the country's economic growth. I've highlighted here some of the concrete actions taken by the Department of Energy to orient policy towards a more flexible and indigenous renewable energy sources. So one is the moratorium on the construction of new coal power plants in the year 2000, increasing the annual mandated percentage for the renewable portfolio standards, allowing 100% foreign participation in renewable energy projects, the setting of a clear 35% contribution for renewable energy in the generation mix by 2030. And in my opinion, most important, the hard coding of this target as part of the clean energy scenario of the 20-year Philippine Energy Plan moving forward. I think it has to be understood that from the Philippine perspective, that prior to the inclusion of a clean energy scenario in the Philippine Energy Plan, the 35% renewable energy target has always been treated as an aspirational goal, never as an actual policy metric to be achieved, but things have clearly changed. Under this clean energy scenario, the Philippines is looking at the build-up of an estimated 19 to 20 gigawatts of new installed renewable capacity by 2030 to achieve the 35% generation mix target, and about 73 gigawatts by 2040 to hit 50%. Given these lofty ambitions, we believe that offshore wind technology bridges that gap to help the Philippines achieve its renewable energy objectives. And its large-scale requirements now. It provides us the energy security through independence from imported fuel, provides the scale to replace fossil fuel-generated capacity eventually, and at a price point that we expect, given scale, will be cost competitive in an environmentally sustainable and responsible way. So that being said, offshore wind in the Philippines is still finding its footing. This is, I guess, understandable, given that everything started in early 2020, the same time as the COVID lockdowns began. I believe, however, that the surge in interest from almost zero in 2020, at the time we were the only ones who had actually applied and been awarded the service contract, to the launching of a World Bank funded offshore wind roadmap for the Philippines in 2022, the forming of a joint industry partnership of more than 50 of the Global Wind Energy Council, the Department of Energy and developers, as well as more than 52 offshore wind contracts awarded, representing a potential of 39 gigawatts awarded in that 3-year span, I believe represents significant progress and a model of developer-led initiatives, garnering the proper government support to maintain momentum. So the moment and the momentum appear to be on the side of the Philippine offshore wind industry. Yet, as we are all familiar, there remains a lot of work to be done before official policy can become workable policy. So when we applied and were awarded our offshore wind sites, the guidelines did not distinguish between onshore and offshore wind projects. And currently the guidelines still reflect this. Our projects therefore use a standardized work program template that allows a fixed 5-year period for pre-development across all RE technologies. As shown on screen, you have the first 10 years of a standard wind development service contract. A critical milestone is on the 5th year, where the developer is expected to have completed all studies and permits necessary to decide on whether to convert to a pre-development contract on operating one. So this amounts to what is essentially a final investment decision on the project. For a technology that combines the scale and reliability of large hydro and the complexity of an oil and gas platform, the 5-year study period is extremely optimistic, even in the most mature of offshore wind markets, and clearly needs to be addressed as one of the key items we believe is necessary to build the industry here. So taking off from there, from a developer's perspective, these are some fundamental issues that need to be addressed to continue accelerating sector development, effectively de-risking and building confidence in the offshore wind market. First off is the amendment of the service contract guidelines, as discussed earlier. These new guidelines need to be crafted to distinguish offshore wind from onshore winds, particularly reflecting the need to allow for a longer pre-development period, especially for the first generations of technology. Moving forward, further distinction must also be made between the fixed bottom and floating offshore platforms. This is essentially critical given that the majority of offshore wind potential in the Philippines has been identified for floating installations. So just to report though that this is already something that the DOE is working on, and the initial parts of discussions with developers and future public consultations was held earlier this week to especially address these particular issues. So there's a lot of optimism that this will also be addressed in due time. Another one is that the permit mapping and process streamlining. At present, developing offshore wind projects is analogous to building a car while driving it. The exact rules, permits, and stakeholders are still being identified, and a number of studies to identify stakeholders and do permit mapping have already been initiated, often funded by the funds that are seeking also to help develop offshore wind in the country. I guess there's a lot of these things, but I guess if I were to pinpoint one key point that needs to be resolved is that the question of a developer's control and right to utilize the seabed, initially for wind resource assessment, and relevant studies then on to do a longer term basis, for the construction and operation of the said project needs to be finalized. So current proposals are that the WESEC itself, or the Wind Energy Service contract, would be enough to serve as proof of possessory right, as granted by the government to the developer. And this is something that the DOE is studying, and we hope also will consider seriously. Another aspect is infrastructure and skills enhancement. To support the build-up of the magnitude necessary for offshore wind deployment requires a commensurate planned investment in infrastructure and manpower capability. Access to the grid is critical to build confidence in the market. And given the number of projects applying for system impact studies, a transparent and equitable queuing process would be a critical step towards assuring developers that the projects are all being given equal footing. On the grid operator side, of course, investment in learning how to maintain the reliability and security of the grid while transitioning to a more flexible power system is also necessary. Aside from the upgrading of the transmission assets, equally vital attention must be given to the development of port infrastructure to ensure that they will be able to accommodate the specialized vehicles and cargo necessary for offshore wind. Who invests in port development remains an open question and clearly requires more study and long-term planning. And last but not least, definitely, is clear offtake markets. It takes around 5 to 7 years to complete the pre-development phase of an offshore wind for offshore wind farms, and investors need assurances on the country's commitment to continuity of policy and fulfillment of obligations. Providing for a growth plan that centralizes procurement with clearly defined installation targets per technology up to 2030 to begin with sufficient capacity, realistic delivery dates, and tariff assumptions would go a long way to provide that confidence. Long-term alternative markets, also battery storage, green hydrogen, to name some, for the energy generated during low demand periods to also be explored, especially as we move forward to the large-scale deployments now. So these, we believe, are the main fundamental points that are needed to be answered to be able to drive the offshore wind sector to grow and the first installations to be seen operating in the Philippines by the end of the decade. So though the offshore wind sector is still in its infancy, we believe that it's already taken adult-sized strides in the right direction. Much remains to be done, but we are confident that we do not have to start from scratch. So with the learnings that we've had over the past decade, as well as the existing best global practices available, we look forward to working closely with the stakeholders to fill in the gaps and make the existing environment even more conducive to the growth of this exciting new sector in the Philippines. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, thank you.
Thank you so much, Theo. Triconti is one of the first runner in terms of offshore wind development in the Philippines, and I trust that the audience have a lot of lessons learned from you. And thank you so much for touching on the overall target, the development process, and some of the key pinpoints in the market right now. So among all these pinpoints, what's the number one hurdle in your mind currently?
I think one of the main issues I think remains to be the transmission, the access to the transmission assets. One, obviously, it will take a number of years, so the planning actually has to start now, and obviously also that the sizes that are being contemplated have to be planned carefully as we move forward to address these.
Yes. Do you see any successful initiatives taken by other jurisdictions in terms of, sorting out the transmission situation that can be applied in the Philippine market?
I think right now there are some ideas, but then it would require significant changes also to existing laws and guidelines, no? Particularly in terms of transmission assets, because especially for offshore, this would entail building assets out to sea, or at least out tens of kilometers out, and therefore the jurisdiction who actually builds this, who manages it, who will maintain these systems. Right now, it's questionable because right now the current laws have only one grid operator for the entire Philippines. So maybe there are some that I think in Vietnam that have considered maybe coming up with maybe small concessional franchises for these areas, maybe something considered, especially specific for offshore wind. But yeah, there's so many moving parts, so it's hard to pinpoint it exactly. But I would say that the transmission, to address the transmission issues would be a big one.
Yes, the second question, we look at the microenvironment. So how do you see the prospects of the rising supply chain cost? As just mentioned by Robert, our first presenter of the day, that it has been a challenge preventing the continuous installation. In Philippines, I guess the price would be more expensive because by nature, the Philippines is an island.
Yeah, that's correct. No, that's why actually one of the things that we've had to impress, at least on the regulators and the Department of Energy, that when you build up for offshore wind, it has to be at scale to provide those economies of scale. Not to say that they would drive the prices down significantly initially, but definitely we believe that rates competitive to whatever because as one thing is that obviously the supply chain has increased, but so has the cost of importing fossil fuel, which is also one of the main cost components for the power supply. And when you balance that off, it actually makes offshore wind deployment competitive from our perspective.
Yes, one last question for you. What's your market focus of offshore wind energy in the country now and maybe 5 years from now?
Maybe reiterating what Attorney Jay had mentioned, we do expect that the first installations will come online by 2027, 2028, if things all go well. But we are definitely encouraged by this administration's commitment to actually being able to push renewable energy and offshore wind specifically, and trying to remove all the obstacles and streamlining the processes to make sure that it happens. So I have to say that from a developer's perspective, this is the most optimistic we've been in a while.
Thank you so much, Theo. Thank you so much for the presentation and answering. And last but not least, I guess many people are, thank you. And last but not least, I guess many people are expecting our upcoming executive panel, the long-term thinking, focusing the next stage of ASEAN wind growth. Now, please allow me to welcome our moderator, Mr. Antoine Gaudin, Senior Consultant, Power and Renewables of MacKenzie. And Antoine, I will leave you to invite your panel colleagues.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for those who are listening from Europe, basically. Yes, I mean, just a brief recap, I guess, about this panel here. So it's supposed to last about 50 minutes, and I mean, it will be like an ongoing conversations, basically. So we'll just start with a brief introductions of everyone, and as part of the panelists, and that's something that I hope the audience would notice, there is quite a bit of diversity that is present. Like we have a range of companies, corporate size, basically, in the developer aspects. We have a range of geographies as well. And I mean, different backgrounds as well. Like you will notice that we have two companies that have an oil and gas background, basically. So the oil and gas majors represented with Total Energies. I mean, that used to be called Total and became Total Energies with with new focus on and added focus on renewables. We have Equinor as well. That is a second company present in this panel. And at last, as well, we have Olivier, who is representing Blue Circle. So it's a company based in Singapore that focus historically on onshore wind, but is as well looking at some offshore wind project potentially. I mean, Olivier can provide a little bit more information. And our last panelist, so it's Alma, who is representing Korean Generation, which is, let's say, a platform part of Macquarie. But I mean, Alma would present her company on her own. Okay, so I guess just before we start, maybe I would just ask like a general questions to the panelists here. So maybe could you just present yourself briefly, and maybe just mention like, okay, what do you like in your job? I mean, what motivates you when you are working on a day-to-day basis? So who is starting here? Olivier, Anders, or anyone else?
I'm happy to start, Antoine, if you don't mind. But thanks for the question, and also thank you so much for having us invited into this panel. So much appreciated. I hope you can hear me and see me okay on the other end. So thank you. So what motivates me in the morning? I do have a fundamental belief for the need for this energy transition. It has to happen. And I also think for my part that offshore wind is a crucial technology to ensure that to happen. There's something about the size of offshore wind, and it's also something about the capacity factor and the stability of the production. So that makes me enthused. Second, I think this is really interesting in the sense that this is where business meets politics. I think that is interesting in itself because it's important for people, it's important for whole nations, how you rig your electricity systems. Thirdly, I think the whole route to market thing becomes so intriguing as time goes. We see it in Europe, we see it gradually in other markets as well, where you need to think differently than just around CFD and feed-in tariff systems, where you need to integrate your energy offering to some extent. You need to risk going merchant, and you need to basically find new ways of profiting into the electricity markets. And last but not least, I think just when it comes to offshore wind, I think the big metal constructions out in the ocean are just fascinating by itself. So that's what really drives me, Antoine. Thanks.
Okay. Maybe let's move on to, I don't know, I can see the face of Olivier there. So I mean, maybe let's have a brief introduction.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you, Antoine, and thank you, the associates, also for inviting me today, representing the Blue Circle. So, just to mention, to answer your question, what drives us or drives me in the morning, I would say two things. First, I'm quite depressed. I'm quite depressed because I've been around for the Blue Circle. I've been around for more than 10 years now. It's our 10 years anniversary this year, and I've been around a little bit more in Southeast Asia, and it's a little bit depressing that to see that few megawatts built after 10 years. I knew when I arrived in Asia that I had to be patient, but there's a lot of patience needed. And we have heard also the presentation on Vietnam of PCC3. We are asking us for more patience. Yeah, we have been very, very, very patient all this time, and looking at all the rest of the world racing to renewables. And here, it was a race at the pace of a snail. So on that side, I'm quite depressed. But on the other side, hopefully, I think we have never been in a better position. So and renewables have never been in a better position for the last 10 years. So we started, the Blue Circle, we started with Thailand and Vietnam historically 10 years ago, and we've built 3 wind farms in Vietnam, operating 2, still 2, and we are now, so we have a lot of things to say on Vietnam. Of course, we were the first foreigner to build a wind farm and own and operate a wind farm in Vietnam in 2017. But since then, of course, we turn our attention to other markets. And again, as I've been said also, I think I totally agree with all presentation which have been led this morning. The most interesting markets and the ones we are focusing on right now are, of course, the Philippines. I think I cannot, agree more with Antoine Jose on the attractiveness of the Philippines right now, and of course also now historic market of Thailand. I think Thailand, we will build, or they will build. We will build 1,500 megawatts until new megawatts before 2030, which is just the first new step towards a bigger renewable penetration in Thailand. So it's a pretty exciting moment. We have been working, believe me, we've been working on this behind the scene for so long that now it's time, and now it's more than time, I think, for renewables to come to Southeast Asia.
Okay, thanks, Olivier. Maybe just let's say, okay, Hang, maybe you can present yourself and have a brief introduction as well about your job title, because like some things that we discussed previously. That let me check if I'm not wrong. You are technically country renewable explorer for Total Energies in Vietnam. And I mean, I was wondering, and maybe part of the audience would wonder as well, like, is there any synergies or correlations made with upstream business of Total Energies?
So can you hear me well? Yes. So first of all, let me say good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Just to say that I'm very happy to be here, and also the excitement to meet the wonderful people, with the person that I admire a lot, with Olivier, Anma, and so on. We have the chance to discuss in the last year as well. So very happy to have everyone on board. So basically, I am working together in the company called Total. Now we have changed the company name to become Total Energies in 2021. So it shows our approach to shift the focus from the traditional oil and gas company and become a multi-energies company with a commitment to reach net zero by 2050. So since then, our company has shown a very high exploration spirit, I would say, with a very few megawatts in 2015, 2016, and now we have achieved around 17 gigawatts in the gross installed capacity globally. So our objective is to reach around 100 gigawatts by 2030 and become the top 5 renewable electricity producers in the world. Therefore, recently in last year, our company has launched a renewable explorer network, we will say, in 65 countries where we have a strong footprint, so that we can push for the development of renewable projects. So the objective of us as a renewable explorer is to open the country and to contribute our development in Vietnam, in particular, toward the overall objective by 2030.
Okay, thank you very much, Orang. I think, okay, our last panelist, so it's Alma, so based in the Philippines. So Alma, you are representing Koyo Generation, and while I'm highlighting Koyo Generation here, and as well, it's something a bit similar with Total. So Total changed its name in 2021. Koyo Energy, I would say, this story is maybe even more recent. Like, it's a company that was created in 2022. Maybe you can just give an introduction about yourself, and in the meantime as well, just present like what is the mandate and the scope of your company.
Thank you, Antoine. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Alma Rojas Aguila. I'm the Vice President for Courier Generation, and I lead the development of offshore wind project portfolio in the Philippines. So basically, Courier Generation was launched in April 2022 by Macquarie and Green Investment Group. So as you may know, Macquarie and Green Investment Group has been the fourth runner of offshore wind development in the UK. We have a huge heritage in developing offshore wind. We've supported 40% of offshore wind capacities in the UK, and we have expanded globally. We have projects in Australia, Vietnam, Taiwan, and Korea, and of course Japan. So in the past years, we have grown up to more than 20 gigawatts of development portfolio across the globe. So yeah, so that's who we are. And to answer your question, basically on what drives me, so I'm actually very happy to have landed in renewable energy industry at the very early stage of my career. You know, being knowing that I am in a business of addressing global crisis, and that is climate change, this makes me more passionate in what I do on a day-to-day basis, basically addressing climate change and giving a legacy in the next generation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alma. So I think, like, since we in a way started to present ourselves, I was willing to maybe address a little bit the differences that we have among different corporations in terms of developers here. And what I would like maybe to start with, it could be discussions about oil and gas legacies, like why are you getting into the business? What kind of synergies are you getting into as well? What have you observed in the background, or your different projects that you may have done previously? And I mean, typically Equinor is companies that I would say started early on among the majors in the offshore wind business. Yes, I mean, maybe like Anders and Ngoc, like, could you tell us maybe a little bit about like the kind of transitions that you have seen in your respective companies from, I mean, the core upstream, downstream, and so on, oil and gas business into like a more, let's say, diversified portfolio in a way?
Well, absolutely. Should I start, Tan Hung, or do you want to go first?
No, please.
Okay. No, so yeah, you are right. So Equinor was kind of among the early movers among the oil and gas companies to start the transition towards becoming a kind of more of an energy company instead of merely oil and gas company. And I think this goes down to a fundamental belief that something has to be done in order to change the energy systems long term. But it's always been kind of challenging, I would say, in companies like oil and gas companies, because you do have a large income stream short term from oil and gas. So it's a careful balancing act in order to, in a way, change the long-term need to build up renewables cash flow at the expense of some of the more short-term high revenue yields that you can see from oil and gas. So I think it's been challenging as much as it has been fun and important for Equinor. And capex wise, investment wise, we have now reached a level where around half of the investments that we will spend by and large is going into energy transition, low carbon and renewables. So I think for us it has been it takes a little bit time in companies like this to build the internal alignment around doing these changes, but it has been well anchored now, and everyone is fully on board and enthusiastic about these type of investments too. But of course they do pose a challenge when it comes to profitability, especially these days where you have these record high gas and oil prices, which is really standing out, and we delivered record high results as late as today on the last quarter. So it's impossible, at least in the short term, to see any kind of similar revenues coming out of the renewables business, unfortunately, but that's life. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, Nguyen, like, do you have like a similar storyline in your company as well?
I think more or less, I think we have a similar approach with Equinor, and then for us, I think the shift from oil and gas to be renewable is kind of the natural, because we have the advantage to have the extensive experience in the energy project. So basically, we have the experience to deliver the mega project with the highest requirement on technology solution in a challenging construction conditions and also in a complex environmental area. So basically, we have shifted our focus. So the company has changed itself. So we gather all of the engineering together under the umbrella of OneTech. So we have all of the technical experts from E&P, from project development, from refined chemical, to support for the development of renewable projects. So that's why I think the transition is purely based on the abilities of the company to deliver the energy project, and also to try to tackle the problem with the climate change and being a responsible energy provider.
Okay. I mean, I would say it will make sense. And I mean, I guess you are using, you mentioned about the engineering synergies, and I mean, the offshore wind, for instance, business has some similarities with some of the upstream work. Where I would like to draw the line here is maybe with other companies that are represented in this panel. So we have, I would say, Alma, that is representing a platform. I don't know if I should call it a platform for Cryo Energy, which is typically relatively smaller. Platforms usually have, let's say, high growth pathways, since they help like the parent company to grow basically this business. Here, I guess I was wondering, Alma, like when Cryo Energy was founded, like what was I mean, you mentioned about the target overall, but like what was the idea behind the creation of the company? Like, was it the objective was to just decentralize everything and have functions purely dedicated on offshore winds to fasten the growth?
Yes.
Or create like platforms for advocacy, for instance? Is it something like this?
Yes, that is correct. So if you are familiar with Macquarie and Green Investment Group, basically Macquarie is a financial institution. We deal with asset management, we deal with banking, we provide financial services, banking. So with regard to when we bought Green Investment Group, Green Investment Bank in the early years, and we ventured into renewable energy development, the management basically thought that with regard to development, there's actually a different strategy as compared to being a financial institution, compared to being a developer or a renewable energy developer. So that is when Macquarie and Green Investment Group decided to form or launch Koryo Generation to be its offshore wind portfolio company, operating on a standalone basis. In that case, in a way, our management decide very fast. We remove some layers of financial approvals as compared to financial institutions such as Macquarie. So that was the main reason why Koryo Generation was launched.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. And I guess like moving on to our last panelist in this round of question. So Olivier, like I would say you are smaller, but it's not a fair assessment here, given that in a way you started a little bit earlier, maybe than everyone. I mean, you started in you mentioned in your company about 10 years ago, and I mean you worked on with other companies before. So it's a little bit like the story of the Turtle and the Rabbit in France, like so something that was written by La Fontaine maybe 4 centuries ago. So the story is that it's a race between the turtle and the rabbit. They have to reach the finish line first, and the narrative turns out this way. So you had the turtle that was very slow but started early on, and the rabbit that was relatively fast. And in a way, the rabbit like moved on maybe a little bit too late, and the turtle finished like winning the race. So it's a French story that every kid learn. So that's why I'm just repeating it for everyone. So looking at your company, Olivier, like Blue Circle. So you have a background with onshore wind, offshore wind business as well, which is maybe not as large as onshore wind. And so I was wondering, like, first of all, like, how does a company like yours maybe behave differently compared to like other larger companies? And secondly, like, what are the core differences that you see in Southeast Asia between like onshore wind and offshore wind at your developer level?
Yeah, thank you, Antoine, and thank you for the analogy of the turtle and the haze. Yes, thank you. Yes, I hope to be the turtle. Yes, at least I started before the others. That's for sure. And just for a small background, I've been doing this. Involved in renewables, and especially in the wind sector since 1999, so another century, 1 century ago. So long time, and I've been working and managing my own company since 2001 in the wind industry. So before in Europe. So yes, I see some analogy, of course, with the current situation in Southeast Asia, but also some very big differences. On the what I found when I arrived, I would say, every country is different. Every case is of course very different. And I would say the most difficult for us at first have been to get into the land issues. You may have heard that, again, every country, of course, has its own legacy in terms of land ownership, and every country, I would say, we have been in all of the countries in Southeast Asia, excepting maybe Brunei, but everyone has a different, of course, history, background, and legal system. So it has been, I think, the most difficult for us first to get our to grasp and get our hand around. Having said so of course, again, what is the difference? What could be the difference between us and the others? I think, and also the difference is also because we are, and I am it is my company. I have entrepreneurial background, so I think it's maybe more entrepreneurial than large corporations, which might be less entrepreneurial. But it means that the approach of risk taking is very different, very different, I would say. And I have been very fortunate to find some along the way, of course, in the last 10 years, to find some partners, because of course you cannot do anything alone. So you have to have partners, and especially in Southeast Asia, local partners. And I've been very fortunate to find partners pretty large in some cases, with the same mindset, with the same entrepreneur mindset, and you have to take the risk. I remember very well an example, very simple example. I remember very well in 2017, the Vietnamese PPA. Everybody was saying, no, don't forget about Vietnam. PPA is not bankable. Price is interesting, but it was before the increase. It was 7.8, if you remember at that time. Everybody was saying, oh yeah, there's a feed-in tariff. It was the only country in the region with a feed-in tariff at that time for wind, but for onshore wind. But 7.8, everybody was saying, yeah, interesting, but PPA is not bankable. So instead of that, we went ahead and we developed projects working at that price, at that level of price, and being financeable and financeable by local banks. In 2018, we were the first one also to have a non-recourse, the first time ever to have a non-recourse financing from a Vietnamese bank for a wind project. So again, I think that's mainly it's mainly the summary of all. It's the risk taking, risk appreciation. I would say you have to have, of course, pioneers. You have to have people who take the risk the first, and then the others are recognizing that finally that was fine, and everybody agrees that you can take the risk. So and that's exactly what happened after. It's pretty funny to see again also all the craze of the last 2 years ago and 1 year ago on the Vietnamese market. So everybody was finally absolutely fine with the PPA and absolutely fine with the EVN risk. And scrambling to get the hands on megawatts in Vietnam. So again, yeah, to answer your question, I think it's mainly a matter of risk appreciation, seeing where it goes, and what is acceptable or what would be acceptable from, of course, a local point of view, not only from an international point of view.
But I mean, speaking about point of view and bankability of projects, and I mean, there I would like to maybe open the floor to everyone. And you rightly pointed out that each country is different. And I mean, myself, I do a lot of regulatory analysis, typically commercial analysis with all different markets, and each country is different. Even within one single country, you could have a lot of different revenue streams, typically, and a lot of different geographic regions that offer different opportunities. Like looking at, let's say, broader Asia. I mean, we have typically, Equinor and Enders. When we discussed previously, you mentioned that you are currently working in South Korea, for instance. Alma is working mainly in the Philippines. Hung and you, Olivier, are mainly working, Vietnam. I mean, Olivier, you are working on the markets, but Hung is mainly working on Vietnam. And I was just willing to maybe ask you, just with your background, what is, let's say, the biggest barrier to overcome in your respective markets and your respective point of views? What is necessary right now, maybe to ease up the process? Is it moving along with maybe a complete derivatizations of the markets? Do we need a wholesale price, as it was something that was suggested with Enders, for instance? Should we move away, from the feed-in tariff? Do we need a stronger grid? That's something that was raised previously. It was one of the panel. And I don't want to open any anger, have any anger on the panel here. It's not a good idea, but just with your experience, what do you feel would be necessary to move ahead at the higher speed? So yeah, it's an open floor for anyone.
Probably can I jump on first with a little bit comment on Olivier sharing, because I have a huge admiration towards the Blue Circle. Exactly what we said in 2017 from Paris, from Singapore, is that the PPA was not bankable, and a few years later we see that the Blue Circle delivered the project in Dam Nai in Ninh Thuan province. It was very impressive with very high quality equipment and so on. So in 2020 and 21 we have seen a massive development of solar and wind capacity in Vietnam. So we thought that we could jump in with the operating asset, but the reality with us was really, really challenging. So when we analyze some of the operating assets, we see that some of the performance of the assets is, some project is 15 to 20% reduction comparing with the design. And some other projects have so many problems relating with the technical, with the environmental impact. And also it has left a very bad impression towards the local citizens. So with us, I think that the challenge is that the current market, some of the operating assets don't match with our own criteria in terms of the ESG performance. So that's why recently we have decided to go for the development of the new project, so that we can tailor the technical, the standard relating with the safety to match with our own company.
Okay, and I think Anders, you were willing to raise a point, and please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. And sorry for barging in on you there, Tan Hong. Probably a lag on the line. So no, there's a few things that I think that would make sense in most markets, and I'm allowing myself to expand a little bit beyond Asia now, because I think these are generic points that will relate to many markets around there, including in Europe and Latin America. And volume. In order to establish yourself in a country, in order to get foothold, you need a significant volume over time. So there needs to be political determination to make this big enough, because it takes a lot of effort and risk and capital to get established in a new market. Number one. Number two, I think we have to, and this is probably a bit technology specific, but my bread and butter is offshore wind. And for that technology specifically, there has to be an acknowledgement, especially when we are venturing into floating technology, that there needs to be some kind of support in order to kick it off. And then as you go big, you will see cost reductions, and eventually you will hopefully be able to meet grid parity. Thirdly, I think there's speed and determination and simplicity in the whole regulatory setup. We need as much of a one-stop shop as possible, because sometimes you're taken back and forth to all kinds of institutions in a very complicated way. And I think in most markets it's possible to make this more into a parallel run than a sequential run. And the last one, I think you pointed at it already, Antoine. I think one of the more under-communicated things, and that goes for all markets almost, I would say, is grid. We need grid in order to let the electrons flow into the highest paying part of that market. Otherwise, you're going to have congested grid, and you will see a lack of willingness to invest in renewables, because it will lead to some kind of market deterioration. Thank you.
Okay, and I mean, moving to our other panelists. I mean, Alma, Anders mentioned about grids, and we all know that the grids in the Philippines, I mean, if we're looking a bit more southern, typically between like Luzon and Visayas, it's quite congested right now. You don't necessarily have a lot of points to connect your assets. So I mean, maybe could you mention a bit about it in your case, and maybe beyond the grid, like what are the true and other barriers in the Philippines right now? And I mean, what a lot of people ask as well, it's of course about the ownership of assets in the Philippines, which I think is not 100% clarified. And even like when I was looking at the list of questions that was asked in the question and answer box, there was a question about the local content for offshore wind that is developed in the Philippines. Maybe you can just mention mention a bit more about the ecosystem in the Philippines, and
Sure.
what you would foresee in the coming years.
Okay, so thanks, Antoine, for that question. So basically, in the early 2021, when the World Bank launched their Philippine roadmap for offshore wind, they identified the attractive sites for where offshore wind has great potential. So they look into the entire country, look into the wind resource, environmental constraints, and other, of course, also the grid connectivity. So they've identified which area in the country would be the best for both fixed bottom and floating sites for offshore wind. Basically, these sites, while they have very attractive wind resource, the the grid connectivity might be lacking, especially the ones in the Visayas region, wherein there's really a congestion of grid there, and the power demand center is actually in the Luzon area. So the developers or the basically for the projects in the Visayas area to be evacuated to Luzon grid, that is the challenge. So in that case, we need to have a transmission line from the Visayas grid and to connect that to the Luzon grid where the demand center is. So that is the challenge that we are facing right now as offshore wind developer, because the most attractive wind resource in the country are not really connected to the grid. So that's one. And in terms of the, based on what one of your questions earlier about the foreign investment restriction, so it has been but the barrier to entry by foreign investors or renewable energy developers. So luckily, the Department of Energy has issued a department circular now allowing foreign investments in renewable energy up to 100%. However, we believe that because this particular department circular is not yet enacted to law, it may be challenged by any party. So I guess that's where we are right now. It has not yet passed into law, but there is already a department circular by the DOE. So hopefully we expect that sooner there will be more clarity, and there will be like a finality in this particular in this particular foreign investment restriction policy.
And I mean, one question that is asked, I can see in the question. So I mean, thanks a lot, Damien, actually, for asking about the different questions. So I don't think we have time to address all the two questions, but maybe I was willing to focus on the second question about grid connection. And I mean, maybe in your respective countries, I mean, it's an open question for the panel. So in the Philippines, in Vietnam, or any other markets, what has been your view and perception about the third-party access, basically? So the ability to connect your project to the grid and sell the project directly to the consumers, or maybe have you seen even other projects where you have entered, let's say, direct lines with where basically you build like direct lines between your project and the consumers, or did you enter like projects where you helped the grid to reinforce itself to basically allocate your different projects? So I mean, that's something I was willing to touch upon, and that's something which is not talked a lot yet in Asia, in Southeast Asia in particular, given that most of the transmission and distribution markets are heavily regulated. The third-party access is not available. The ownership and building up of transmission lines is often done by a single utility. Yes, I mean, I'm trying to look maybe at more liberalized markets and what could be the good case that you have seen overseas. So yeah, it's an open question for everyone here.
Yeah, maybe if I can just jump on this as the first one. You're absolutely right. That's a key question, and we know where we're coming from. You just highlighted this, but I would highlight it even more. We are in the world here, in a part of the world where all the local utilities have the monopoly of distribution. So this is not, so it's again, I think for us, the way to go and the market to look at as an example is Australia. I think that's the most, of course, liberalized and open market, and very advanced on its transition from coal, from one of the largest coal generation country in the world, to renewables. I think that's really what what should come and should be implemented also everywhere in the world, but especially here in Southeast Asia. So that's I think where what we should aim at. Unfortunately, it's very far from being the case in nearly all the countries, excepting the Philippines. I think the Philippines, of course, as we have mentioned, and as everybody have heard, is the most open country and market in the region. We have heard again Antoine and Jose mentioning all the regulation right now applying to the Filipino market. There is a wholesale market. With priority dispatch for renewable energy producers. So that's perfect. What is missing is, and the grid is privately owned, as you know also. So again, everything is in place, I would say, excepting that maybe again the regulation could be optimized, and especially of course the grid could be reinforced. And it's funny to and would maybe just finish on this. I think all the utilities of the region, from PLN to EVN to even the privately owned, know that they will not have enough resources to cope with what we're talking about, to cope with the gigawatts of renewable energy which needs to be implemented, built, and financed and connected to the grid. They will not have the financial muscle to build the grid for all these megawatts and gigawatts. So they open on the paper to private ownership. So EVN, for example, in Vietnam, I think, and maybe we'll have confirmation here from Total that yes, on the paper, at least there is a regulation where the private sector could invest into transmission lines. So fantastic. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not possible to be implemented for the moment because we don't have the exact rules to be implemented. So that's for EVN, but and there's the same also for NGCP, even if it's privately owned. They have the monopoly, and if this is possible for private project developers to build their own line, but not to bundle, because then it's going to be public, and public is mandatory under NGCP. So again, rules that could be very simple to change, will change a lot. Will allow us to implement a lot faster and a lot more megawatts, but it just needs to be open to the private market. Really, real openness to the private market to be able to do it in a regulated market manner, of course.
And I mean, Halma, I mean, like looking at the Philippines again, which is actually a curious case, because like you are the market that liberalized its, let's say, generation assets and unbundled some of the distribution utilities. Like the first, I think it was in the 90s, and even before I was born, some of it, to be honest. Like, what do you see right now, like on the ground? I mean, we know that NGCP, for instance, is a prominent player. Do you see like, okay, do you foresee like ways to maybe have a bit more like liberalized approach to develop projects? So is it through, I don't know, the pricing contracts? Like, are you ready to accept a bit more, let's say, volatility on the WESM, the wholesale price in the Philippines? Are you willing as well maybe to build up more transmission assets around your projects if you would have to, instead of NGCP or distribution utilities?
Yeah. So I think it's actually a chicken and egg situation here in the country. For NGCP to come up with a plan to build or upgrade specific transmission lines or upgrade the grid, they require commitment from generation from the developers. Okay, so but in our case, being the developers, we need the infrastructure, the grid infrastructure to be in place before we can actually determine the cost, commit to a certain timeline, deliver the project, and be able to build it. So that's actually the dilemma that we're facing right now. But interestingly, actually just yesterday, the Department of Energy had an initial consultation with offshore wind developers in the country, wherein they presented their draft offshore wind specific policy or regulations. So there was a provision there, or like there's a sentence there saying that one or at least two developers can collaborate on offshore on building and on building an offshore substation, for example, and they can share equitably on cost. So that has been in the draft offshore wind specific policy of our DOE. Well, that is while we for me as a developer, I think that's a good strategy. But thinking about it in more detail, I think it might also pose a challenge on the part of developers, because if we are to say, for example, compete in a specific auction, it's there's a competition there in terms of securing that specific capacity in that auction. So that could also be a dilemma for the developers to collaborate, to come up to build a one offshore wind substation, for example. How much megawatt or how much megawatt or gigawatt will it the capacity of that offshore wind substation be, and which among the 2 or 3 developers would be able to win in that bid. So what happens then if the other did not get the allocation? So that's a dilemma. So also timing may be also an issue in terms of doing that collaboration. But yeah, these are the things that, or the details that need to be discussed thoroughly among stakeholders, among the developers and the policymakers. So while in the drafting of the policy, it's good that the regulators are actually talking or listening to developers to give in their inputs. So aside from the grid, we the developers also would want to include port infrastructures and perhaps submarine cables in that cost sharing strategy. So, but of course, as I've said, that is still that still needs to be reviewed and to be understood in greater detail.
Okay, thanks a lot, Alma. And I think we have about 2 to 3 minutes left, I think, technically speaking, for this panel. Maybe Anders and Ngoc, we would like to jump on these questions and maybe just discuss what is your point of view, maybe based on other markets or other continents.
Yes, so I would jump a little bit on the grid connection in Vietnam. Of course, the government, they allow for the private sector to invest in the grid on the paper, yes, like Olivier has mentioned. But actually, there was a private company, they build their own grid, and then now they finish, and now they want to transfer the substation for the government, but they couldn't do it. So I think the policy relating with the grid investment, how to transfer it is really complicated. So when we talk about the offshore wind, of course, with the size of, let's say, 1 gigawatt, the extra money to invest into the grid is possible. But whether we have the way out for our investment in the grid, whether the government has the policy to compensate on that or to take over the grid with its cost. So it needs to be clear for the developer to be certain about the investment, what are the benefits for them to invest. But yes, I think the possibility for the private company to invest in the grid is possible, but whether we feel it's secure enough for us to put an extra 100 million or 150 for the grid is a big question.
And yeah, Anders, maybe like any comments on those? And I mean, I know that when you are typically looking at auctions, which is most of the time like the way to get projects into different markets, things can get tricky actually. I mean, each markets have different rules and so on. You could have sometimes pricings that do not match the actual cost. I mean, Taiwan, everyone bids at zero NTD, so Taiwanese dong. Taiwanese dong just to secure like corporate PPA. Yeah, what do you see like on your side with those auctions and maybe other practice?
Well, we do see, you know, for me, and this goes a little bit back to what I didn't say in the beginning, was basically to present myself, and I'm sorry about that. But one of the things that I do on behalf of Equinor is to host the prioritization of different markets. So we do, you know, always consider the risk-return ratio, which I think is underpinning all sorts of investments, really. And you see there's a tendency, of course, that once you venture into markets that have an established industry, you will see that the yields go down, which is only natural because the risk is also going down. And I think these discussions are fundamentally important. Obviously, there are some markets which we don't want to go into simply because the risk-return ratio isn't good enough. But by and large, I think this is all about composing a portfolio that makes sense over time, that is diversified across different type of markets, different type of support from CFD type of support to basically merchant markets. So when we host these discussions internally in Equinor, it's rarely about this is a no-go market and this is a perfect market. It's all nuances, and it's all about risk appetite versus the need to have a certain yield from whatever you invest in. So it's very difficult to say exactly, but zooming a little bit into Asia, we have seen, of course, like many others, that South Korea has been a good market for us. It's very interesting. It's big. It's decent wind speeds, and a pretty good regulatory regime with these green certificate arrangements. And then one of the things that I'm very interested in seeing now is what happens in Vietnam with the PDP-8, which continues to take time to implement, but very, very interesting. But it's important for us, I would say, as developers, to have clear views and clear direction from government on what type of system are you solving for. Is it going to be a decentralized model where the whole industrial undertaking from the investors like ourselves is big, or are you coming to kind of a ready-made table Dutch-style centralized model? It's these things that are highly important for us to know, and the sooner governments can, in a way, set direction, the more likely it is for companies to tune their attention towards those markets. Thank you.
Okay. No, I mean, I would agree, and I mean, as part of our coverage, I mean, we look at those different regulations, and I mean. Back to the original question, and I guess it would be the final comment of this panel. What do you enjoy at work? I mean, like for us, it's a diversity, I think, of roles. Some people would say it's changing too fast. So funny enough, like I have another panel in 2 days' time, and one of the panelists openly mentioned that for him it was just too complex. Everything was changing all the time, and I do agree. It gives me a bit of headache from time to time, but I mean, it's part of what we like in a way. I mean, if we would like to be in a business where everything stays the same, we would be doing something else, I would say, maybe. Okay. No, but I think thank you very much for your time, everyone, and yeah, I appreciate the discussion, and in any case, I would be happy to see you respectively later on.
Thank you so much, Ms. Antoine, Ms. Anders, Ms. Alma, and Mr. Olivier. Thank you so much for contributing to such a wonderful panel discussion. A quick remark from my side. I believe the key word for all of us is faith. In the comeback against climate change, ups and downs are inevitable. Nevertheless, the priority has always been faith, to believe the work that is valuable to our current and future generation, and keep pushing forward. As much as I would love to have everyone talking, this is the end of the Impact ASEAN Wind Day and the APAC Wind Energy Week 2023. By next Monday, we'll be sending out today's recording and slides. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop me an email at the below contact or at me on LinkedIn. Once again, today's Impact is the prelude conference of the ASEAN Wind Energy 2023 to be held in Ho Chi Minh City of Vietnam on October the 30th to 31st. With over 600 APAC wind C-suites and more than 5,000 wind industry visitors, the ASEAN Wind Energy 2023 is Southeast Asia's largest wind energy conference and wind tech exhibition. Lastly, a big thank you to everyone here. Thank you so much for staying with us. See you next time.